Hi, Lou here, and the topic for today is how do you sell war games in a climate where people don't particularly like war games? Now, I'm a baby boomer, and I was born 6 years after the end of World War II during the Korean War. And most baby boomers are quite aware of warfare because of their origins. And it turned out that the game hobby that was typical for baby boomers was war games. But as we get farther away from the war, World War II, people seem to be less and less tuned into why wars are sometimes necessary and how important they are. Today, wars tend to be something that's thousands of miles away, and yes, people get killed, but it doesn't affect strongly people in the United States. So, as a French person told me who had come from Paris, France, and listened to my talk at WBC, if you have a war game and you want somebody to play, don't tell them it's a war game. Tell them it's an historical game, tell them it's an interesting game, tell them why it's a good game, because if you tell them it's a war game, they won't want to play. But if you don't tell them it's a war game and they play, there's a good chance that they'll like it. Now, that's odd, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. And the topic really today is, what is it that you have to do to sell war games? Now, I think that there are certain things that are the real kiss of death in a game, and one of them is cardboard counters, especially with numbers on them. That tends to smell of war games, especially if they have like steps on the back. Another thing that tends to put people off, I think, is having to put stickers on blocks and having those blocks have lots of numbers on them. So I try, though I don't always succeed, to have only one number on a block rather than a lot. Hexagons in themselves don't seem to put people off because there are games like Ingenious by Reiner Knizia that use hexagons, and people are accustomed to hexagons as a kind of abstract way to depict things on a board. So I think the focus is on the pieces. Now, what most people do who want to sell war games is they use plastic figures. And this topic has come up because I am finally convinced that I'll have to have plastic figures in the third edition of Britannia when I finally get it done. And also there's a possibility that the second edition of Britannia will be reissued soon, and it will have plastic figures. Everything else will be just the same as the Fantasy Flight version of Britannia, but it will have plastic figures. There's more to that, and sometime I'll talk more about that. So it is possible for a war game to become popular with non-war gamers, and my example is always Small World, where somehow, and I don't understand exactly how, the manufacturer has persuaded people that it's not a war game. That may be partly because it's a fantasy, and partly because it's rather abstract. It's not exactly what you'd call a realistic war game at all. And the combination seems to take people far enough away from warfare that it doesn't bother them. But if you make a even semi-realistic war game, you can't do that. And so things like the appearance and having figures rather than cardboard, and Small World does have cardboard, is more important. Now, where does that put us? Some people like cardboard. Is it practical to put both cardboard and plastic in the same game? I don't think so, because cardboard is a significant expense if you have a lot of cardboard pieces that only a certain number of people will use. So if you're going to go plastic, you got to go all the way. And that's where we are today with war games. Plastic or perhaps blocks if ideally people don't have to put stickers on them, but that can be difficult. But also just have a single number on the block instead of the blocks that you turn, rotate several times in order to indicate the strength. And there's A, B's, and C's on them, like in Columbia Games. That smells of wargame. Having cards in a game takes you somewhat away from the realm of war games. Not using dice may take you somewhat away from the realm of war games. Although there we have to consider that Axis and Allies and Risk have both made it as mass market games, and they're big dice fests. So I don't think that dice in and of themselves puts people off from war games. Now, this is supposed to be 3 minutes and already almost 6, so thanks for listening.